Hi guys, welcome back to my Mini Z ma030 Evo review part 3. In this video we've put the Mini Z up against what I think is probably the best chassis on the market at the moment, the Bz3, and there is so much information in this video that I am going to have to make a second part to go through everything, but it was absolutely amazing on race day how both these cars performed. I won't keep you in suspense, but the Mini Z did actually surprise me. I was so surprised at how good it actually was. I'll go through details in a moment. Let's just start off with the basics first. So before we could do any racing, we had to fit transponders to both cars, and in the previous generation Mini Zs, well, definitely with the standard Mini Z all-wheel drive, you can't just stick a transponder into the socket because it doesn't seem to work unless you wire it up to the battery. That's not the case with the Evo. Now, I don't know if the other Evo rear-wheel drive Mini Zs are the same, but in this one you can just plug the transponder directly into the plug that you would use for the ICS lead, and it works absolutely fine. So for neatness and usability, it was so straightforward just to plug it in, and this car is very neat. Let's not forget that this Mini Z is also running on AA batteries. These are just standard nickel metal hydride batteries, and that is a big plus as well, not having to mess and change batteries that often. The batteries do last a decent amount of time, whereas with the lipos for the other cars we had to change frequently. This one you could go 4 or 5 races before the battery started to drain down. So that's the first thing. Obviously we had to fit transponders in the Bz3 as well. In this instance it's wired into the receiver using the positive and negative on one of the 3 channels, and okay, it's not that much work, but still it is nice having a nice little neat plug that you can just plug in and straight away you're up and running. So how did they fare around our circuit? Now I have got footage of them separately being run around our circuit and the lap times they achieved. It doesn't tell the whole story. I'll start with the Mini Z first, and I'll put the lap times up in later on or in the description. So a good lap time on our circuit is anything which is, I'd say, under 8.5 seconds. 9 seconds is kind of like when you first run around the circuit. If you're slow, it's about 10 seconds. A fast time is if you get down to 8 seconds. Well, within about 4 or 5 laps of running the Mini Z all-wheel drive Evo with the Audi shell, I'd done a 7.9, which was really impressive. It took me months to get a 7.9 with my SZ, and within a few laps I was already hitting them. Very, very impressed. It was so drivable. The chassis is really well balanced, and yes, there's not as much adjustability out of the box as you'd get with the Bz3, which has so many areas you can adjust it. This car performed pretty much standard out of the box. By standard I mean with the double wishbone suspension, which is included in this kit, but you'd be crazy not to use it. Yeah, it flew around the circuit, very drivable, so predictable, so smooth. And by smooth I mean the drivability of it. It wasn't twitchy at all. Very, very good car. Really surprised me. I thought this was going to be such a black and white review and I was going to go on about how brilliant the Bz3 was in comparison. No, this Mini Z is actually very, very good, and I'll go through the pros and cons of each. I'll try and list them in the description, but I will say that we had a few issues with the KT18 radio. Now I don't know if this is down to the fact that it's an older radio I've got, but there were a few times with it being ASF we did have a bit of interference or something, and the car steered in the wrong direction. I want to look into that, but I think if you're going to get this car, if you've already got a good Kyosho radio like the Synchro Touch, or you're thinking of getting the MB4, it's a worthwhile investment to get those radios rather than using a KT18 with this car. I think you'll get more out of the car. Plus you can adjust the gyro from those radios. But even as just with the KT18, I loved the handling of this car. fact, everyone who had a go with this car was really impressed on the day how well and easy it was to control. So yes, the lap time we got with it was about 7.9 seconds. I'll put the exact times up later. But yeah, very, very impressed. Nice car, nicely balanced, drove really well. It's so easy to use out the box, and doesn't mean that it's not a great handling car, that it's easy to use. It's just very predictable. And I think that says a lot about the chassis and the way they've set it up, the balance of the weights of the chassis. Okay, so the Bz3. Okay, let's move this out of the way. The Bz3 got the fastest lap time. It did 7.5 seconds, but it took me a while to get to that. It does fly. It is super responsive, and if you're not on the ball, it is going to punish you. And that's what we found, that in terms of driving the car, if you're a brilliant driver and you can handle it, it's going to win, because it is so responsive. And in some of the footage you'll see, I'll put the shell back on and I will demonstrate this on the track, but I'm going to go a bit old school here and actually pretend to run the car along and make the noises. No, I won't make the noises. I will just, although it does make a beautiful noise, this car, the screaming sound of the motor with that belt drive is something else. But with this car, you could be coming towards a corner, about to hit the corner if you're offline, and you could literally at the last second swerve around the apex and it would drift around beautifully. Absolutely amazing. The Mini Z can do that too, but this was just that bit more responsive. Now that depends on your driving style. If you have a smoother driving style, the Mini Z, absolutely fine. And when these cars went head to head, and I will put footage up of this, the Mini Z and the Bz3, when you've got other cars on the circuit, they won 2 races each. The Bz3 did set the faster lap times in both those races, but I cannot downplay how good this car is. And obviously, this is where Kyosho get you every time. If you pay for better upgrades for it afterwards, maybe if you change the front springs, change some of the camber angles, all the parts that become available afterwards, it might improve it even more. But I love this car as it is, and I wouldn't do much else to it. The 8,500 kV motor was brilliant. On a side note, the Bz3, we've actually got an atomic 5,500 in there, a kV, and it was more than powerful enough. Initially when I drove it, I had to set the drag braking to 100% because the size of our circuit, by the time I could respond and brake, the car was already hitting the corner. So I did initially put the braking on drag 100% and then turn it down to 30%. But it is fast and responsive, very, very responsive. But it will punish you if you make a mistake. The Mini Z, you can make a mistake, it doesn't punish you as much. Very drivable. I mean, the only way I can compare it to is like a real life Audi R8 versus say something like a McLaren, where a McLaren is very twitchy, but very rewarding. Whereas the Audi R8, it's a little less twitchy, a bit more everyday drivable. So certainly if you've already got a good Kyosho transmitter or a transmitter that's compatible, I think this car would be even better. So that was just with the KT18. I used a Radio Link transmission receiver with the gyro built in for the Bz3, and that was really good. And I'm sure with a better transmitter, maybe that would be even better, or maybe even more twitchy. I don't know. I'll have to test that in my follow-up video for the Bz3. We'll use a different radio and see how that works out. So I'm going to put some footage up next of the Audi first, which is the Mini Z Evo, and just see how that performed on the track. Then I'll put some footage up of the Bz3 and you can see how that performed on the track. And we will then maybe put some footage up at the end of both cars running together, which doesn't always show the true nature of the cars because you've got another car in the way. But let's see how. So when we were running this car around the track, one of the things that we really noticed was really impressive was the braking. With this car, when you brake, you really feel like it's a real set of disc brakes, ceramic disc brakes, slowing this car down for the corners. It's so responsive on the braking. Really enabled you to fly right into the corner and brake and pull it in. Very, very good. You could almost hear the brake screeching. It was brilliant. So yes, very good on the braking. The characteristics in the braking were very predictable as well. It did just respond. I mean, overall, this car is very convenient. You know, with the standard AA batteries, the lifespan of those batteries for each race, the fact that it's also neat and tidy, it's a big selling point. So I think short of maybe using a better radio, yeah, this car is great. The Bz3, as you could see from the footage, some amazing corrections at the last second. The car just glides around. I love this car. I mean, it is absolutely amazing. Would I recommend this car for everybody? No. I do think that given the right circumstances, this car will outperform the Mini Z, certainly on a larger track. With the settings I've got at the moment, with the standard spec for the Mini Z Evo, I think, you know, if you're running grip tyres on a massive track, this thing is going to fly around and outperform just about anything out there. Will it beat the GLA? I don't know. I haven't got a GLA yet, so that might be the next thing to review. But on our track, certainly this thing, you know, was limited by the size of the track. It made it harder to control, but still it did perform the fastest lap time, which says a lot about the car. It's very adjustable, and I haven't really altered the settings from the standard that we set up from the manual. Is it something that I would recommend as a race day car? Yes, it is if you're experienced. I think if you want something that's going to run out of the box, the Mini Z is going to be a better option. If you're experienced and you know what you're doing and you know about settings and you know how you like your cars to handle, this car is going to be the car for you. So what's the final verdict? Who actually won? Who came out on top? If you go by lap times, it was the Bz3. If you go by head to head, I think the Audi may have won. There is a couple of other things that the Bz3 doesn't like. If you get a knock from another car, it does send it flying. It's so light that it doesn't like if it's touched by another car or bumped by another car, whereas the Mini Z Evo with the Audi shell was very stable. Now there is a slight difference in track width. I think the Audi is at 74 millimeters, and the Bz3 there's got a 72 millimeter track as set up with the wheels that we're using at the moment. That could have played a part in that, but I think it is just the lightness of the Bz3. Also, the motor is mounted centrally on this car. With the Mini Z Evo, the motor is mounted at the front, as you can see here. So that could play a part in that. Apart from that, the cars were fairly equal on our track in terms of who won what. But if you want a real race competition car, the Bz3 is going to win.
Thank you, Pepper. Thank you, Pepper.